Looks like we have one person connecting to audio still, so we'll give it just another couple seconds. All right, for the sake of time, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're having a community conversation about the South Middle community planning area. My name is Ellie Schaefer. I'm an urban designer and planner with the firm MIG. We're a consultant helping the city on this 2040 policy mapping effort. We've also got Kathy Cornett and Maddie Pleasant on the call as well, who are from the community planning department at the city. So on October 13th, we hosted an informational meeting to discuss how two maps, the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map and the Charlotte Streets Map, will inform future growth, development, and mobility around the city of Charlotte. In today's meeting, we'll provide a brief overview of what was covered in that informational meeting, including the purpose of each of those two maps and how they relate to one another. The majority of today's meeting, however, will be a community conversation around the draft Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map. We want to provide an up-close look at how the 2040 policy map recommendations were developed within this community planning area. And then we want to talk about how we might need to revise the citywide mapping approach to make it more accurate or better aligned with the comprehensive plan. So given the limited time that we have today, we're going to be focusing on capturing all your comments and questions, and then we'll consolidate everything we've heard from this meeting series and post responses and answers online. But that said, I'll try and respond to as many questions and comments today as possible. So with that, let's briefly review what was covered in that informational meeting. So what is the purpose of the 2040 policy map and the streets map? The purpose of these two maps is to help implement the vision of the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which is the guiding document for our city's growth and development over the next 20 years. The Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan was adopted in June 2021, and there are now several major initiatives underway to help put the plan into action, including those shown on the bottom half of this slide. So the 2040 policy map will identify appropriate locations for future development in our community. The streets map will define multimodal vision for Charlotte streets to support mobility between the places we live, work, and play. The Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO, will consolidate and update the city's land development regulations so future development is aligned with the vision of the comprehensive plan. And a draft of the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, was released on October 7th. More information about that initiative can be found at cltgov.me/CLT Future. We can put that link in the chat for you as well. So the 2040 policy map and the streets map will both help implement the vision of the comprehensive plan. And they'll accomplish this by informing how our built environment evolves and changes over time. The built environment includes both land use and transportation related characteristics. So each map provides supporting information about the places we want to create. In particular, the 2040 policy map will inform the type of development, including land uses and building form that's appropriate to occur in specific geographies throughout the community. And the streets map will define the future cross sections for arterials in the city and streetscape requirements. So with an understanding that both maps are intended to help implement the vision of the comprehensive plan and that they'll both help inform the city's built environment over time, let's briefly take a closer look at the streets map and then the 2040 policy map. So what makes a street? A street looks, feels, and functions the way it does based on all of the pieces within, extending from building front to building front. So all of the components in between are important. This diagram on the screen is what we call a cross section. So you can see in this diagram how the various components of the street work together to serve all users and to create streets that allow more people to move more easily around our city. So the streets map is the mapped vision of our multimodal street network. It's based on council adopted policies that have been developed and refined over the last several years. It shows the recommended cross-section for all of Charlotte's arterial streets and will support both the 2040 policy map and the Unified Development Ordinance to help ensure that we're providing for multimodal streets as we grow and develop. So the streets map is currently in a draft state. We want to remind you that you can go online to review and provide comments on the streets map along with the policy map through November 14th. On the project website that Kathy put in the chat, there's also an interactive map. Sorry, there's an informational video that'll show you how you can interact with the map and leave comments. So today we're going to be focusing more on the 2040 policy map. If you do have any questions or comments about streets or the streets map, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll collect all of those and pass them along to the streets team who will post responses on that project website. So moving on to the 2040 policy map, this is a companion document to the comprehensive plan and will translate the plan's place-based policies to specific geographies in the community. So place-based policies are those in the plan that provide guidance for where and how development should occur. When adopted, the 2040 policy map will replace the city's current policy map, which is called the future land use map. So this map aims to provide comprehensive and citywide direction for how Charlotte will balance both the needs and opportunities that come with future projected growth. This mapping effort will also ensure we align future growth with infrastructure capacity so we grow smartly and maximize our resources. And finally, the 2040 policy map's citywide direction means we can ensure historically underserved areas are guaranteed better access in the future and Charlotte becomes a more equitable city. So since the objective of this mapping effort is to evaluate and balance citywide needs and opportunities, the 2040 policy map will not provide parcel-specific analysis that has historically occurred during the small area planning process. The 2040 policy map was developed using a new tool called place types and followed a three-step process. So place types are a new classification system to organize patterns of development. They're not zoning districts. Place types are more complete and holistic than the city's current classification system, which is called future land use. Place types provide guidance for the mix and proportions of land use, building form and design, mobility, and open space. The place types tool was vetted by the community during the development of the comprehensive plan. Stakeholders provided input on the types of places that are right for Charlotte. And then the 2040 policy map applies the place types vetted during the comprehensive plan to specific geographies throughout our community. So using the new place types tool, the draft 2040 policy map was developed following three steps. The first step was to translate existing development on the ground into place types. This step was completed to illustrate how the place types are intended to be applied at a half block or block level, and it's a helpful point of reference. The second step is the adopted policies map. So this step was to translate the city's adopted area plans and zone districts into place types. So this map illustrates how Charlotte would grow if we did nothing different and did not map the comprehensive plan policies. So the second map kind of shows the status quo or business as usual type scenario. And then the third map is the 2040 policy map. So this step built upon and revised that second map to reflect the comprehensive plan policies. So by building off the adopted policies map, this process doesn't erase past planning efforts that are still valuable to our community. Instead, it respects what's working for our community and only revises the shortcomings that fail to address the city's current and future needs. So here's a bit more detail on what went into each of those mapping steps. The first major input for the adopted policies map, looking at that second map, was future land use recommendations from area plans that were adopted since 2010 across the city. This guidance accounts for approximately 27% of our land area. For remaining portions of the city, the second map was informed by zoning or existing entitlements of a property. In instances where the existing zoning district did not clearly translate one-to-one with a place type, we used a market analysis to identify what was the most realistic future of that property. And then the major inputs used to revise the second map to produce a draft 2040 policy map include the equitable growth framework and the preservation policies from the comprehensive plan. And then the draft recommendations were checked against several other data sources, such as our growth projections, environment, infrastructure capacity, and market realities. So the place types palette itself includes 10 different place types. Those are shown on this page. They generally fall into 3 categories: live, work, and play. So there's more detailed information about these on the city's website if you want more background, but generally there's 2 different neighborhood types in the live category, as well as parks and preserves. Then in the work category, we have commercial, campus, innovation, mixed use, and manufacturing and logistics. And then in the play category, we have 3 different scales of mixed use activity centers. So those 3 scales are neighborhood, community, and regional. And Kathy just put a link to the comprehensive plan manuals and metrics in the chat. So again, there's more information on these place types on that website. Here's just a little bit more information about the place types that I'll leave up for just a second before we dive into the South Middle community planning area. Okay. So the phase 2 community conversations that we're hosting now are organized around 15 community planning areas across the city. Today's meeting is intended to walk through how the process played out in the South Middle community planning area. So the area we're looking at today, as you can see on the zoom in map, is generally bounded by East Woodlawn Road, Sardis Road, I-45, and I-77. Then there's the blue line, which runs parallel to South Boulevard, and there's the South Park Mall in this area as well for some landmarks. So as I mentioned, the mapping approach began by translating what's on the ground today and then what future place types would look like without the comprehensive plan. So this first map reflects existing development translated into the new place type tool. So this is a helpful point of reference for us during this process. This place type translation was based on existing land use data and development patterns. So you can see we have mostly commercial and some manufacturing and logistics in red and purple along South Boulevard. We've got some more nodes of commercial throughout the community planning area at major intersections and at the South Park Mall. Most of the area is neighborhood 1, so low density residential, with some parks and preserves and some campus and higher density neighborhood 2 kind of sprinkled throughout. So again, this is the existing condition in this area. So now we have the second step, which was the adopted policies map. So this map translates the city's existing adopting policies and entitlements into place types. So the net change between the existing map and this map is shown on the right side of the slide. One thing I'll point out is that we're losing a good amount of parks and preserves. That's likely because those areas are actually zoned for low density residential and are not zoned for parks. So without applying the comprehensive plan policies, something like that, those could be potentially redeveloped. We're also losing a good amount of the commercial place type, but mostly in exchange for community activity center. So we're losing some of the red in exchange for some of this medium blue color, which is more of a mixed use, higher density activity center. And then you'll also see we've lost some campus, and that's largely because it's been absorbed into the surrounding neighborhood place type. So it's really saying that those types of uses, schools, churches, different things like that can happen within a neighborhood place type. So now we'd like to walk through how the place types were revised from that adopted policies map we were just looking at to better align with the vision of the community and the comprehensive plan. So first we'll look at mapping of preservation policies from the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan includes policies to preserve existing neighborhood 1, parks and preserves, and manufacturing logistics. So you can see those 3 place types shown on this map in yellow, green, and purple. In some areas, these place types were already preserved based on that adopted policies map, but the areas highlighted in blue show additional areas where these place types were preserved as part of this 2040 policy mapping step. So you'll see we were able to preserve 63% more of the parks and preserves in this area, as well as 16% more of manufacturing and logistics. And ultimately, we just added less neighborhood 1 than the adopted policies map was adding, but not necessarily losing existing neighborhoods or anything. So as we step through each of these groupings of place types and policies for the 2040 policy map, we want to ask you some questions about what you've seen reflected on the draft map so far. So we think a number of steps described in the current mapping approach are accomplishing the goals of the comprehensive plan, but we'd like to hear whether or not you agree. So our first question is about neighborhood 1 and parks and preserves. Later in this section, we'll have a chance to take a closer look at manufacturing and logistics. So our question for you here, we have a Zoom poll that we'll launch, is the mapping step to preserve neighborhood 1 and parks and preserves aligns with Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan's direction to protect community assets. So we're asking whether or not you agree or how strongly you agree with that step. And I can't see the polls, so Maddie, if you want to confirm that it's launched.
Yep, everybody's still submitting their answers. It looks like we've got about 50% right now. Give it a few more seconds. All right, if anybody wants to still submit, we're gonna give it about 5 more seconds and close the poll. All right, so I don't know if you can see those results now, Ellie, if I share them, but
I can't now.
That's fine. So it looks like we've got about 9 people answered, and we've got about 44% with agree. 11% strongly agreed, and then we had 22% neutral and 22% disagree.
Great, thanks. So we're going to keep moving, but if anyone wants to provide any comments about their response, feel free to enter it in the Zoom chat. Okay, so next we're going to look at mapping of access to housing opportunity policies from the equitable growth framework in the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan calls for creating a more equitable future for all of Charlotte, which means we need to ensure future growth and development benefits everyone. So in order to measure who does and doesn't currently benefit from past development, the comprehensive plan included the equitable growth framework, which assesses which areas have low access to housing diversity, jobs, goods and services, and are impacted by environmental justice issues. So on this map, areas outside of the black diagonal hatches are lacking access to housing diversity. So again, outside of the hatch is lacking access to housing diversity. The bullets on this page are the metrics that were used during the comprehensive plan to understand where access to housing is currently lacking. This step in the mapping approach was focused around making place type recommendations that would provide better opportunities to provide housing unit diversity. So the items that aren't underlined on this page can really happen within any neighborhood, and therefore we'll be exploring other tools outside of place types to help address those gaps. Those other tools could be things like programming, design solutions, infrastructure projects, and more. So neighborhood 2 is a place type that helps provide more housing opportunities through housing unit diversity. Here you can see in orange where neighborhood 2 was mapped. We evaluated a number of features when looking for housing opportunities, including sensitive environmental features, development status, whether an area is undeveloped or underdeveloped, proximity to transit, proximity to other place type assignments, land suitability for different uses and densities, and more. Another big one I'll point out is that we considered the existing development. So, keeping in mind our previous step, which was preserving neighborhood 1, preserving parks and preserves, and manufacturing logistics. So in some areas, neighborhood 2 is already mapped based on the adopted policies. The areas highlighted in blue show additional areas where neighborhood 2 was recommended as part of this step. So you'll see on this map, really most of the neighborhood 2 in this community planning area was mapped in that second mapping step, the adopted policies map. So what we're seeing on the map should help fill those gaps a bit more. I'll also note that in the activity center place types, which we'll look at a few slides from now, those place types can also provide more housing opportunities. So here you can see those first 4 place types on the 2040 policy map. We've now added neighborhood 2 in orange. So you can see how those are helping to fill some of those housing opportunity gaps, and they're pretty well distributed across the community planning area. So we've got another question for you we want to ask at this point. Now we're looking at the second row in this table. So is mapping more neighborhood 2 in areas with low access to housing opportunity a good approach to increasing housing diversity in the future? So we want to know whether or not you agree that using neighborhood 2 to help address those housing inequities is a good approach. We'll launch another poll if we haven't already.
We just launched that, so we're going to give it about 20 seconds for everybody to answer.
Great, thanks.
All right, we're going to give it about 5 more seconds. So if anybody hasn't answered and would like to, please make sure you submit that. All right, I'm going to end the poll. So it looks like we have 13% who are strongly agreeing, 13% who agree, 13% who are neutral, 38% disagree, and 25% strongly disagree.
Interesting. Okay, thanks, Maddie. Yeah, so if anyone would like to elaborate on especially why they disagree or strongly disagree, we'd really like to hear your comments. If you could put them in the chat, that would be great. And we'll have a little more time for discussion a bit later in our presentation. So next, we're going to look at mapping of access to employment opportunities. These are the second component of the equitable growth framework in the comprehensive plan. So now on the map, areas outside of the black diagonal hatches are lacking existing access to employment opportunity. So the bullet points on this page are the metrics that were used to understand where access to employment is currently lacking. The place type mapping aimed to provide the opportunity for employment within a commute shed, about 1.5 miles of every neighborhood, not necessarily within every neighborhood. So the items that aren't underlined can happen within any employment area, and therefore we'll be using, again, tools outside of place types to help address those gaps. So we are really looking at providing employment opportunities within a commute shed of neighborhoods. So campus and innovation mixed use are 2 place types that can provide more employment opportunities within close proximity to neighborhoods. Here you can see there's not too many of these place types in this community planning area. There's a small area of campus on the west of South Boulevard there in a teal color. Generally, most of the campus in this community planning area was absorbed into neighborhoods. So most of those areas were schools, churches, other community uses. So based on the definitions of place types on the 2040 map, we've absorbed those into neighborhoods. So you can see that there's somewhat limited opportunities for campus and innovation mixed use within this community planning area, given the other policies that we're mapping. But again, I'll point out that activity centers, which we're going to look at next, will provide more opportunities as well. And I think that those are a bit more successful in terms of how we were able to map those in this planning area in particular. So here's a clean version of that, of the 2040 policy map with the first 6 of 10 place types. I don't think that we have any innovation mixed use actually in this area in particular, but again, a little bit of campus west of South Boulevard. So our question for you here is mapping campus and innovation mixed use in areas with low access to jobs a good approach to increasing job access in the future? And again, this is a citywide mapping approach. So although we didn't have the opportunity for these place types in too many locations in this area, the question is meant to be more general, looking at kind of the city as a whole and the citywide mapping approach.
I just launched that poll, Ellie, so we'll give it another 20 seconds and we'll end it and look at the results. All right, let's give it about 5 more seconds. So if anybody has not submitted their answer and they would like to, please do so now. All right, I'm going to end the poll. So I'm going to read off the results just because it's not letting me share on this one. We've got 0% strongly agree, 57% agree, 29% are neutral, 14% disagree, and 0% strongly disagree.
Great, thanks, Maddie. So again, feel free to put any comments you have in the chat about that question. So next, we're going to look at mapping of access to essential amenities, goods, and services policies. So this was the third component of the equitable growth framework. So now in this map, areas outside the black diagonal hatches are lacking existing access to essential amenities, goods, and services. So the bullet points on this page are those metrics that we use during the comprehensive plan to understand where access is currently lacking. The underlying metrics were specifically identified as items place type mapping could help address. So fresh food, access to healthcare and pharmacies, and access to financial services. The items that aren't underlined, again, can really be provided in any place type. So therefore, other tools outside of place types will be explored to help address those items. So commercial and activity centers are place types that can help provide more access to amenities, as well as access to housing and jobs. So here you can see in red, pink, blue, and navy where these 4 place types are mapped. In some areas, these place types were already mapped based on the adopted policy map, and the areas highlighted in blue show additional areas or changes to those place types that were recommended as part of the 2040 policy map. So here we have the complete 2040 policy map. One thing I'll point out as a part of that last step is you're seeing navy around the South Park Mall. So it's looking at envisioning more of a regional scale activity center in that location, adding some hierarchy across the community planning area. We've got community activity center along South Boulevard. There's a small neighborhood center, which you can see in pink at Colony Road and Ree Road intersection. And then there's a few other community activity centers dispersed throughout at major intersections. So this is a complete map, so I'll leave it up for just a second if anyone wants to get a close look. Okay, so I think we have 2 more questions in this polling step. So first, is mapping activity centers in areas with low access to goods and services a good approach to increasing access to goods and services in the future?
All right, we're going to launch that now. It looks like we're having the same Zoom error that Zoom's been having lately. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that question into the chat. If everyone could just send their response there. Give me one moment. I will include the options as well. All right, so that question is now in the chat. If everyone just wants to take a second and submit their response. We'll give it about 10 more seconds so everybody has some time to read through. If anybody needs more time, please feel free to let us know. All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds and then we're going to move forward. And also, if anybody wants to submit it directly to me, feel free to do that by using the drop down, if that makes you feel more comfortable to answer. Ellie, if you want to go ahead and move forward to the next one, I can paste that in.
Sure. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks
Absolutely.
for bearing with us with some technical difficulties, everyone. Okay, so the last component of the equitable growth framework is environmental justice. So on this map, areas outside the black diagonal hatches are impacted by environmental justice issues. So you can see most of this area is not impacted. Mostly the gaps in environmental justice are along major roadways and transportation infrastructure. So again, the bullets on this page were the metrics that were used to understand where environmental justice is currently lacking. A few things we were able to look at through this mapping process. One was the floodplain. So we did not map any more intense place types than currently exist in the floodplain. The place type mapping effort also used buffering and transitions to reduce the proximity between neighborhoods and heavy industrial uses and neighborhoods and major transportation infrastructure as much as possible. So opportunities to provide that buffering or transition were limited based on existing development. So other tools, again, outside of place types will be explored further to help address these inequities. So this is our last polling question. We'll see if it works or if we need to use the chat again. So knowing that our opportunities to help mitigate environmental justice impacts through place type mapping were somewhat limited on a citywide look. Our question is, how important is it to explore additional tools to further mitigate environmental justice impacts during the community area planning process? So that's going to be the more detailed area planning that'll come after this process is complete.
I'm going to put that one in the chat again since it is still offline. All right, that is now in the chat. So if everyone wants to take about 20 seconds to answer, again, you can also send it directly to me if you want to answer anonymously. We're going to give it about 5 more seconds for everybody to keep answering. All right, Ellie, if you want to keep moving forward, if anyone still wants to answer, feel free to put that in the chat as Ellie continues.
Thanks, Maddie. Okay, so next we want to highlight what the previously mentioned place type mapping recommendations mean for this area in terms of attracting new housing units and future jobs. So the city of Charlotte is projected to grow by almost 150,000 housing units by 2040. Given the place type recommendations within this community planning area, this area would be projected to capture almost 18,000 housing units, or approximately 12% of all new housing units citywide. And then the city is projected to grow by almost 200,000 jobs by 2040. So given the place type recommendations within this community planning area, this area would be projected to capture about 12,400 new jobs, or approximately 6% of all new jobs citywide. So now that we've walked through the draft 2040 policy map recommendations for this area, we'd like to get your feedback on the draft mapping approach. The objective of this conversation is to collect feedback both on the current steps in the mapping approach, as well as potential revisions to the approach. So there's really two types of feedback we can use to revise the mapping approach. First, we can identify additional steps to add to the mapping approach, which would better align the final 2040 policy map with the comprehensive plan. And then we can discuss potential adjustments to the current mapping steps that would help improve the accuracy of the map. So again, what this process cannot do is incorporate parcel-specific revisions that do not inform an overall change to the citywide mapping approach. Since this is a citywide mapping effort, we need to balance future needs and opportunities across the city as a whole. Okay, so now that we've gotten your feedback on what's been reflected in the mapping approach so far, let's turn our attention to what might be missing from the mapping approach. So we've got another poll question here. I'm guessing we're gonna have to keep using the chat instead of the poll. But so we recognize that the current mapping approach is just a starting point, and we might need some additional steps to better align the map with the comprehensive plan. We have a few suggestions for additional steps that we're considering, and we wanna see if you all agree with them or not. The additional steps that we've heard from our interdepartmental stakeholders are related to 3 of the 10 place types. So first, looking at manufacturing and logistics. What we've heard from our partners in economic development is that some of the existing manufacturing and logistics sites, especially close to Uptown, may be better suited for other uses due to changing needs of the manufacturing industry. So our question for you all here is it more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics sites, or to consider where repurposing these areas may better serve other community needs in the future?
All right, that is now in the chat. So we're going to continue doing that through the chat, just since that's offline. If anybody wants to send it directly to me instead of the group, you are welcome to do so.
Thanks, Maddie. So the 3 responses are more important to preserve existing ML, which is manufacturing logistics, neutral, or more important to consider repurposing ML. And I see a question from John. Why haven't you added safety as a place type? I have been requesting this since early 2020. So John, safety is something we would consider across the whole city, citywide. It's important that, you know, we have all of those fire, police, et cetera, everywhere. So it really kind of spans all place types. One thing we are looking at is the fiscal impact of these place types, and in particular, are there more emergency services that need to be provided if growth is happening outside of, you know, current population centers? Are there more fire stations, that sort of thing? So that is something that we are considering as an impact from future growth in place type mapping.
All right, we're going to give that about 10 more seconds for anybody else who wants to answer. And then Ellie, if you want to keep moving on, anyone is welcome to continue answering in the chat.
Thanks, Maddie. Okay, so our next question of 3 here is looking at neighborhood 2. So we've observed that there's a lot of large single family lots located along major transportation corridors in the city. So these are sites that could evolve to become neighborhood 2 or have higher density residential to provide more housing options in the future and really utilize existing infrastructure. So our question for you is, do you think it's more important to preserve existing single family lots along major transportation infrastructure, or is it more important to provide more housing options in those locations? And Maddie just put that one in the chat. So the 3 options are more important to preserve existing single family, neutral, or more important to provide more housing options. And again, this is a 20-year planning horizon that we're looking at. So we're not talking about anything happening overnight. Give it a few more seconds if anyone else wants to provide their thoughts in the chat. Okay, let's keep moving. So our last one in this series of questions is about commercial. So we've heard from some of our planning colleagues that a lot of the existing commercial development throughout Charlotte doesn't align with the comprehensive plan's vision for walkable and integrated communities. So our question is, how important is it that commercial places in this community planning area in particular evolve into neighborhood activity center? So your response can vary from on the scale from very important to very unimportant. So again, we're looking at how do you think it's important that commercial place types in this area evolve into neighborhood activity centers? That would be more of a mix of uses, more activity, more walkable, lots of different characteristics there. Okay, thanks for all the responses. So finally, let's talk about any concerns you have with the draft map itself. So by talking through the specific concerns, we expect we'll be able to identify adjustments to the mapping approach to help make the next draft map more accurate. So what adjustments need to be made to the mapping approach? We've got a few examples on this slide, but generally, if a certain site isn't showing up as the place type you expected, maybe it's too small of a site to qualify as a separate place. So maybe we need to look more closely at the thresholds for sizes of different types of different place types. You know, it could also be that there's an issue with our data, existing entitlements or zoning wasn't translated properly. So if that seems to be the issue somewhere, we can figure that out as well. Okay, so since we can't be sitting around a table marking up a map together, we're hoping to use this annotate tool in Zoom This is not very mobile friendly. So unfortunately, if you're on your phone, this will be a little bit hard for you to participate in, but please feel free to speak up with comments or put them in the chat if you're on your phone and can't use this tool. You can also use the interactive map, which is on the city's website, to get a closer look and provide detailed feedback. So to open the annotate feature, you're either going to expand the view options drop-down menu or refer to the black menu bar at the top or bottom of your screen. Everyone's screen tends to look a little bit different. And then we're going to have you click the annotate button and select the stamp tool. So we're going to use the heart stamp just because it's the easiest to see on our map. So again, going to your menu, finding the stamp, and then choosing the heart. I'm going to share the full map in just a second here, but you can click on the map using the stamp tool to place a stamp. You can place a stamp anywhere you have a concern about how something is mapped, or anywhere you want to discuss. And if you need to fix or remove a stamp that you've placed on accident, you can use the eraser tool, which is on that same toolbar, or you can click undo. And then lastly, you can click the mouse button on that toolbar to get back to your normal mouse. So we're going to pull up the map and give everyone a chance to place their heart stamps. Remember, we're just using a heart because it's easiest to see on our map, but feel free to place a stamp anywhere you want to discuss. And after everyone has had a chance to place their stamps, we're going to save a screenshot and then we'll discuss different stamps that were placed on the map. So here's the full map. Feel free to start placing stamps anywhere that you have concerns you want to talk about. If anyone's having trouble with the tool, let me know if I can clarify how to use it or anything like that. We'll just give it a minute or two for people to place their stamps.
Ellie, there's also a question in the chat about how are place types going to inform future planning differently than small area plans?
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so so for one, future place types are going to be mapped. They're mapped citywide, so it'll be updated planning direction for the entire city. Second, small area plans, while they do include recommendations on different topics, typically the policy type mapping is using a tool called future land use, which really just looks at types of uses, whether that's something like residential or commercial or office. And sometimes it looks a little bit at density, but place types are really a more holistic tool that include what mix of uses might be appropriate in different areas and what the building form should be, what mobility considerations should be and how they should be different in different place types, as well as parks and open space considerations. So they're really, it's really meant to be a change in tool from what's used in small area plans to something that's more holistic and to provide updated planning guidance for the whole city. Another question, explain the major distinctions between neighborhood 1 and 2. So the major distinctions is mostly density. Neighborhood 2 is made up of primarily single family residential. It does allow for duplex development and has some supporting uses like schools and other community uses. Neighborhood 2 is higher density, so you might get more multifamily residential. You might have supporting uses like commercial on the ground floor of an apartment building, or nodes of retail or other supportive uses. So it allows for a little bit more of a mix and is higher density.
There's also a question too about parking for neighborhood 2. It's kind of more of a UDO issue. How would that be handled?
Yeah, thanks. So of course with neighborhood 2, there's more people and likely more required parking. So the UDO will be translating this place types map into a series of zoning districts, and parking regulations will be included as part of that process. And again, there's a draft of those that effort online on the city's website if you want some more detail about the UDO. And then I'll answer one more question in the chat before we look at the map. Proximity to shops and other services. And I think you're asking about in neighborhood 1 and 2. So neighborhood 1 tends to be more expansive, but as part of this effort, we're looking to add neighborhood centers or nodes of commercial to improve the access to amenities in neighborhood 1. Same goes for neighborhood 2, but neighborhood 2, like I mentioned, will also have more of those kind of commercial shops and amenity type uses included within potentially as well. Zoning classifications are not going away. They're not being replaced by place types. Place types are a guiding visionary tool, and zoning is a regulatory tool. So these will be used to inform the UDO process and new zone districts. Thanks, Kathy. You just put a link to the draft UDO in the chat. Okay, so let's look at the map because we only have a few minutes left. So I'm seeing a cluster of hearts around the Community Activity Center at Pineville Matthews Road and Providence Road. So let's start there. Does anyone want to talk about why they placed a stamp there, what their concern or comment is in that area? Feel free to just unmute and speak up if you placed a stamp there. Anybody have a comment on that Community Activity Center at Pineville Matthews Road and Providence Road? I'm seeing 3 heart stamps on the map. Oh, looks like maybe can't unmute, I think is what that's supposed to say. You can also put your comments in the chat.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, I'm the guy that put the 3 hearts at that corner. I have considerable concern about your classification of the developments along Springs Bank Lane as neighborhood 2. Okay, there is no proximity to shopping because very simply, you can't cross Pineville Matthews Road without being killed. It's as simple as that. All you really need to do is look at where the crosswalks are. There's a crosswalk at the corner of Providence Road and Pineville Matthews Road, and then you don't get another one until you get to Arboretum View. And then when you get across to the fantastically designed Arboretum, you find that there are no continuation of any sidewalks. So that is a huge, huge problem. And I would say that the apartments and the townhouses that have been built, gated, both gated, along Springs Bank Lane don't deserve to be called neighborhood 2 because there is no proximity to shops and other services. Certainly in the northwest quadrant of the Arboretum, you've got a lot of medical office buildings. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the comment, and we'll make sure and pass your streets and crossing and sidewalk related comments along to the streets team as well. Okay, we've got another heart stamp up at the Regional Activity Center at the South Park Mall. Does anyone want to speak to that stamp?
This is Emily. That was both that one and then the Community Activity Center, like along South Boulevard. Kind of similar sentiment to George, is just curious about the connectivity for these types of activity centers to the neighborhoods, because similar to George's concern about the Arboretum down there, you've got major thoroughfares dividing these activity centers up so that the connectivity is not super safe as it stands right now. So I guess another question for the streets team, but just curious about how that's being handled as part of maybe the place types.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so the place types do provide guidance for multimodal connectivity. So they are envisioned to be, I mean, they're all basically envisioned to be, very walkable and user-friendly for people using different modes of transportation. And again, yeah, anywhere where it's an arterial street, we'll make sure and pass your comments along to the streets team as well. We got a couple minutes left. I'm seeing one more heart at Ree Road and Providence Road within our area. Does anyone want to speak towards that one?
That's me again, unfortunately. I was involved in a rezoning recently at Alexander and Ray Road, and about 8 months ago, there was a rezoning of that parcel on the northeast corner for 44 townhouses. Unfortunately, the same problem exists trying to get across Providence Road. There is a crosswalk there, but a very, very poorly designed crosswalk with no refuge for pedestrians. And when you have bus stops on either side of Providence Road, there's no way to get from one bus stop to the other. So you've got a huge problem there. By the way, that's classified as neighborhood 1. So you don't take into account recent rezonings. Not impressive.
Thanks for your feedback. Yeah, so, you know, we're using the most recent data we have, of course, citywide. It's a lot of data to keep track of, but I appreciate you pointing that out, and we can see if there's updated data that we can fold in citywide. All right, so before we wrap up, we can touch on next steps. So we're continuing these community conversations until November 10th. So all the sessions are going to be recorded and available on the project website if you're not able to attend any that you want to go to. There's also going to be makeup sessions scheduled throughout this phase 2 that we're in. And then we're going to be hopefully doing in-person office hours contingent upon COVID protocols. That whole schedule is going to be on the project website. So then we also have our online comment application, which is open through November 14th. Please feel free to visit the website and provide more detailed comments and get a closer look at the map and look at it in other areas of the city. There's hard copies of our comment form available in libraries and YMCAs across the city. So if you know anyone who doesn't have easy computer or internet access, please do spread the word about that. We're going to be using this community feedback to identify citywide revisions to the policy mapping approach. And then we're going to have a second draft of the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map launched in, we're expecting early 2022, so early next year. And with that, that's all we have for today. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending and providing your feedback. Really appreciate your time. Hope to see you in another one of these community conversations soon.
Would you mind going back one slide so I can take a screenshot of that for our, thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, got it. Thank you so much. And thanks
Mhm.
everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone.